Thank you for coming here tonight. It's great to see you all. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Old South Church for the National and Personal Toll of the Opioid Epidemic, a discussion event with authors Sam Quinones and Maureen Cavanagh, hosted by Mayor Martin J. Walsh. My name is Brendan Little. I'm the Policy Director for the Mayor's Office of Recovery Services at the City of Boston. Thanks to Mayor Walsh's leadership and commitment, we are the first and only municipal recovery office in the United States. We work at the local level to increase access to care and build bridges between city departments and the community at large. We also work to fight addiction stigma, especially through holistic approaches like wellness and art. September is National Recovery Month, and tonight's event is the culmination of the Mayor's Recovery Month Book Club, our Recovery Month initiative focused on increasing awareness of substance use, while also promoting literary arts in the community. This month-long citywide read, including tonight's event, has been a partnership between the Mayor's Office of Recovery Services, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, the Boston Public Library, and the RISE Foundation. It's the first time we've ever done anything like this, and so far, the engagement and feedback has been incredible. Thank you all for participating and attending tonight. Before I explain a little bit more about tonight's agenda, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the gravity of the subject that we are tackling tonight. And since the event is about the national and personal toll of the opioid epidemic, I wanted to briefly relay a personal story. While I'm up here tonight as a representative of the City of Boston, I am also here as an individual in long-term recovery from addiction. 13 years ago, in the earliest days of my recovery journey, I would regularly attend a 12-step fellowship meeting that rented a room in this very church. I was 18, homeless, and in need of a lot of support. My first sponsor in recovery used to attend that meeting. In case you don't know what a sponsor is, it's someone who, with a longer period of recovery, who helps somebody with an earlier period of recovery. This man had a warm, loving energy. He was hilarious. On the steps of this church, I nervously asked him to be my sponsor. He smiled and responded, "I was waiting for you to ask me." He and a few of my other close friends that I now consider my family were pivotal in my early recovery. At a time full of anxiety, shame, and instability, these men taught me what a sober life was possible. But even though this man was able to help plant the seeds of recovery in me, he eventually relapsed. The disease of addiction took hold of him. His disease quickly progressed. He became increasingly isolated. A few years ago, he died of a drug overdose alone in his apartment, just a couple blocks from this building. As we're gathered together here today for this important event in the very church where he and countless others have found a sense of peace, even if just for a brief period of time, I'd like to ask that you join me in a moment of silence to honor him and all those who have lost to addiction. Thank you. So the flow of tonight's event will be as follows. Maureen Cavanagh and Sam Quinones are going to individually speak about their books for 10 minutes each, and then we'll be joined by Mayor Marty Walsh, who will lead a discussion with both authors. The discussion will be followed by an audience Q&A. We ask that you hold your questions for the authors until the end of the discussion. This event is scheduled to end at 7:30, but if you'd like to stick around, the authors will be available from 7:45 to 8:15 to sign books near the entrance of the church where you came in. Additionally, Trident Booksellers is here, and they are selling both titles. Finally, I'd like to thank my whole team that put this together, my boss, Jen Tracy, colleagues Hannah Magnates, Arturo Nutella, Ali Reagan, Ashley Felix, Teresa Young, the city's arts team, Tom Johnston, Christina Carroll, Ken Brissett, Amy Andel from Special Events and Tourism, and our partners at the Boston Public Library, as well as the RISE Foundation, Julie Burns, Tabitha, and Mark Walsh. I'd also like to thank Courtney Flynn from the Trident Booksellers. With that, thank you for your time. I'm so excited to see you all, and I'd like to introduce Marty Martinez, the City of Boston's Chief of Health and Human Services. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I get the pleasure of introducing our first author of tonight, but before I do that, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Brendan for telling your story. I think oftentimes when we think about this work, we sometimes forget how important it is to tell our stories, to hear those stories, and to lift up those voices. And so it's not always easy, and it's not always something everyone does, but from me to you, thank you for doing that, because it helps us in this journey. I have the pleasure now of introducing our first author, Maureen Cavanagh. Maureen, who's a local author and advocate from Marblehead but lives in North Reading as of recently, is here tonight, and like so many others, her family has struggled with addiction. In her debut memoir, If You Love Me, which she's going to discuss tonight, Maureen tells us the challenging but hopeful story of her daughter's battle with heroin use. After crashing head-on into the stigma that still surrounds addiction, Maureen became a fierce advocate for people with substance use disorders. She's the founder and president of the nonprofit Magnolia New Beginnings, which provides support to individuals and families struggling with substance use. Maureen is a beacon of resilience, courage, and love in the face of an epidemic that is ravaging our communities. She's helped countless people in their time of greatest need. I got to speak to Maureen just briefly before tonight's event began. And we talked a little bit about some of the work she's done and some of the feelings that she's had. And the piece that caught me the most was the courage and fight of a mother. And I share that, and I say that to her, and I say it to you because if you know someone who's courageous and someone who has fight in them, who works to find that last piece of hope, oftentimes it's a parent, or it can be a mom. And as someone who was very close to my mother, I know that fight and struggle that's there, and so thank you for keeping that hope. I'm so honored to be here with you tonight, and I'm honored to welcome and have you join us up here and tell your story. Maureen Cavanagh.
Well, I don't know what I could possibly say to follow that. That was lovely. Thank you very much. I just want to thank Brendan and everybody at the mayor's office and everybody that was involved at the library and Tom Johnson as well. There's people that do this, you know, we come in every day and we do our job, and then there's people that do things because it's more of a calling. And I believe that the people that I've dealt with during this last month, especially you, Brendan, have a calling, and you're doing wonderful work, and I thank you. When my daughter we first found out that she was using heroin and addicted to heroin, I didn't know what to do. I was like every other parent. Certainly the last thing on my mind was writing a book. I spent a lot of time Googling things and trying to figure everything out on my own and researching things, and just came up against a brick wall over and over again until I started to connect with other people. I'm hoping, I know that the book will, it's about our struggle and our journey over the last 5 or 6 years, but I'm sure that parents will read this and not feel so alone. And I'm hoping that that's part of what happens from the book coming out. But I'm also hoping that people read it that think that it can't happen to them, and start to get a good idea of what we as parents go through. I'm sure that there must be people here, I know that there are people here in the audience tonight that have walked in my shoes, and it's a tough walk. But I hope that by the book coming out and beginning to put a face on this, which is what I think we need to do, I think that hopefully the stigma will start to be broken down a little bit and we can start to join together, because the connection was the most important thing for me. The book is about our story, basically, how I was blindsided by this, as most people are. No one ever expects their child to become addicted to heroin. We look at our children and we see them, no matter how old they are. I'm sure there's a bunch of 65-year-old women that look at their 40-year-old sons and see the little boy that, that played baseball and that they tucked into bed at night. And that's who I saw when I looked at my daughter, and who I still see. But when I probably could have saw signs, I missed them because I was looking at my child and not expecting that. So I was blindsided like many people, and which made it all that much more, you have to excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, which made it all that much more difficult to find help, because I very quietly tried to find help so that I wouldn't expose her. And I found out that that was not the thing to do. So this is the story of our struggle and how she struggled and how I struggled alongside her. And finally come to learn that we were both on a journey. She was on hers and I was on mine. And I needed to take care of myself and find help for myself. In the middle of all that, I created an organization called Magnolia New Beginnings, and I think that gives the support to people that wasn't available when I was looking for it. And I hope that people will learn about that too as they read the book. I promise you, it isn't all sad. There's lots of funny spots in that book because God knows if I didn't have a sense of humor, I could have never gotten through it. And there's lots of advice too, and I hope that people will take that away from reading the book as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I now have the privilege to introduce Sam Quinones. Sam Quinones is a journalist, storyteller, and author of 3 acclaimed books. He spent a decade living as a freelance writer in Mexico and worked as a reporter for the LA Times, where he covered immigration, drug trafficking, and gangs. His most recent book, which we'll be discussing tonight, Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. In Dreamland, Sam traces how the aggressive prescribing of OxyContin intersected with an influx of black tar heroin to create the biggest public health crisis of our time. Since its release, Dreamland has become recognized as one of the most definitive accounts of the opioid epidemic. It has won numerous awards, including the National Book Critics Circle Award. Sam is a meticulous journalist and a master storyteller. He has helped us understand the opioid epidemic from an international perspective, while never losing sight of the human stories at the heart of the crisis. And just a personal story, the city of Boston recently filed litigation against opioid manufacturers, distributors, and doctors who were misleading practices caused an epidemic. And we were interviewing law firms that came in, these biggest law firms from all over the country came in to speak with us and wanted us to hire them to be our lawyers for this. In every single firm, I was in every single interview, they all mentioned Dreamland as the book that they use as their primary reference. So I just wanted to give that personal book. So it's really become the seminal work. So we're so excited to have Sam here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming.
All right then. Wow, is this a great church or what? Is that beautiful? I walked right through this morning, just like wandering around this area, and I was like, wow, man, this is beautiful. Anyway, how you guys doing? Everybody good? Yeah, thank you to Rise, thank you to the office, thanks to the mayor for doing all this. I'm blown away constantly. When I wrote the book, we thought, my wife and I thought that the book would just fade because I was encountering nobody who wanted to talk about it, Obituaries were fabrications, the whole country was silent. I called it Dreamland because of a little town in southern Ohio called Portsmouth. Portsmouth used to be an all-American town, had a steel factory, shoe factories, had a bustling main street, 50,000 population, but the center of the town was this enormous swimming pool, kind of about the size of this church. It was a place where everybody it was like the community plaza. The guy who owned it owned a shoe factory, and he kept on using he was like a different kind of CEO than you hear about today, I think, most of the time. He invested his money from the pool. He didn't need the money from the pool. He had this shoe factory, so he invested, and the place began to grow and grow and grow, got bigger and bigger. There was always room for more at the swimming pool, and the name of the swimming pool was Dreamland. Dreamland, at Dreamland there was no kind of class differences because everybody looked the same in swim trunks, right? It was where a cycle of life repeated. If you had a child, a toddler, she swam in the shallow end. By high school, she was jumping off the diving board. The parents were off in the field somewhere around the pool. She lost her virginity out in the pool, out in the fields, and her daughter starts again in the shallow. This kind of thing happened. It's what held the town together. And in 1980, the steel mill closed. Shoe factories began to close. Main Street emptied out. Half the population left. And in 1993, they closed Dreamland, dug it up, and it's now a strip mall with an O'Reilly's Auto Parts store as the anchor tenant. And the reason I told that is because I believe this is a drug story, but it's about something far deeper and far bigger than simply drug addiction, drug marketing, drug trafficking. It's about who we have become as Americans, what we have become as a country. And I believe a big part of that is that we have become extraordinarily isolated from each other. Poverty, affluence is not an economic story. This is a story about American isolation and destruction of community, which is why I chose the pool as the central kind of metaphor for the book. This is now, I don't think there's any coincidence, therefore, that this is now the largest and deadliest drug scourge we've ever had. Why is it? Ask yourself, why is it that this is the case? Why is it that the 72,000 people died of drug abuse, more than all the people who died in the Vietnam War died in this thing? Last year, every year we're seeing this now. Ask yourself why that is. One reason is because this is the first drug problem we've had in post-war America that did not start with the drug underworld. Did not start with drug mafias, with peddlers on the street. It began with doctors, pharmaceutical companies, and there are more doctors in America than there are drug traffickers. But why did it start with doctors? Because as Americans, we demanded to have our pain ended. We were so isolated from each other. Addiction is a disease of isolation. We were so isolated from each other. We were feeling like everyone was in a bubble. We didn't have these ways of communicating. And increasingly as a culture, I think, we began to demand an end to pain. Easy, convenient, right? And so it spread all across this country. I'm a barometer of that. I've been speaking all across this country. In the last few days, I was in South Dakota, Kansas, Missouri, Syracuse, New York, Connecticut, and now here. This gives you an idea. I've been speaking everywhere. It was Hawaii, Mississippi, all over. This is an epidemic that has touched, unlike any other in this country. It's deadlier than any other, but it's also spread throughout almost the entire country. Very few places in this area in this country are untouched by this epidemic. But as I travel around, I also believe that this epidemic, as catastrophic as it is for a family like Maureen's, and thousands, perhaps millions, hundreds of thousands, certainly, of families all across the country, how catastrophic it is for economic development, for schools, for just community vibrancy all across the country. This epidemic is also calling on us. It is a most powerful force for change, I think, in this country, because it's showing us how isolated we've become. And it's showing us, and it's prompting us, pushing us to recognize that. It's pushing us to show that we believe that we could all just live alone. And in fact, what I'm seeing all across this country, something that's extraordinarily exciting, encouraging, invigorating, is in every county I go to, you're seeing people come together to fight this. And what's fascinating about it, it's not the usual suspects. Sure, it's the police, sure, it's the jailers, sure, it's the judges and so on, but it's also the PTA and the Quinones Club and the churches. It's also college presidents, coaches, recovering addicts, doctors, hospital systems. All of these, in county after county, this is happening all across the country. quietly. It's a beautiful thing to watch because it is quiet. It's not a spectacular, sexy explosion of interest. Plus, you know what was fascinating about it is nobody went and did a pilot project and said, here's the 10 points how we need to solve this, everybody needs to adopt this. No, every county just did it on its own. That's a beautiful thing to watch. And everyone's kind of like half blind. We're all struggling towards this. That's what I love. I think we should revel in that. I think we should love that. None of this stuff, the solutions, plural, that they're coming up with are all small. None of them is sexy. Good. That's how we got into this. We wanted a solution, an easy solution to all our pain. All right, what was the easy solution? We asked doctors to give us a miracle. Pills for everybody, and look where it got us. Jail cell for every addict, look where that got us. So wherever I go now, I kind of invite people to view this as the catastrophe that it is, most certainly, but also view this as a magnificent opportunity for Americans to come together. It gives me enormous encouragement, in fact, to go around this country and see this, because addiction, widespread addiction to the most isolating of all the drugs that we as a species know, opiates, pills, heroin, fentanyl, whatever it is. What that's doing is pushing us to recognize our own isolation, and in fact, all across this country, pushing us to come together. And I'm seeing this. It's happening incrementally, not sexy, not spectacular. Does not make the evening news, because incremental doesn't make the evening news. But it's happening out there, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I know that this is catastrophic. I know that it's lacerating, horribly destructive to families all across the country. But I think we can find excitement, energy from the fact that it's also pushing Americans to go beyond those silos. Forget about those partisan differences that 24-hour news tells us are so important. And come together and work. And it's a magnificent thing to see all across this country. So I look forward to chatting with the mayor. Thank you very much for setting this all up. Thank you all for coming out. It was a beautiful church. It's been a while since I've been to Boston. And looking forward to talking about this a little bit more. Thank you all.
Good evening, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Mayor Walsh, and I am the Director of External Affairs and Philanthropy at Rise, Massachusetts. And I'm going to say nice things about him. I am absolutely not related to him. Rise is a statewide nonprofit foundation committed to ending the opioid epidemic here in Massachusetts and reducing the devastating impact on people, families, communities, and the economy. We're funded entirely by the private sector, and our goals are to invest in comprehensive, compassionate, sustainable approaches to prevention, treatment, and recovery for opioid use disorder in Massachusetts. We support harm reduction models to prevent overdose-related deaths, and we're looking for ways to reduce the economic impact caused by the opioid addiction on workers, businesses, and communities. I invite you to look more at our website, which is rizema.org. Rise is honored to be a sponsor of this event tonight and to have these two incredible authors and our amazing mayor, Maureen Cavanagh. Without a doubt, the statistics about this epidemic are startling. In 2017 alone, 2,069 people died from an opioid-related overdose here in Massachusetts. There's over 5 people on average dying every single day of an opioid-related overdose. That's enough people to fill this church 3 times over in 1 year. Each and every one of those deaths is a tragedy. And each and every one of us needs to do whatever we can to help end this epidemic of addiction and death. And no one has been more committed to turning this epidemic around and helping people battling addiction than Mayor Walsh. Because of Mayor Walsh, Boston is the first and only city in America that has an Office of Recovery Services that is helping people improve and reclaim their lives. Because of Mayor Walsh, Narcan, the life-saving overdose medication, is in every public safety vehicle in Boston. Because of Mayor Walsh, AHO, Boston's harm reduction program, is probably right now out there in the streets helping people addicted to opioids stay alive, improve their lives, and hopefully find a way to recover. The mayor has a deep personal commitment to making the city of Boston a significant force in helping people suffering from addiction to get to treatment and get through to recovery. On behalf of Rise, I would say everybody here in Boston, Mr. Mayor, we thank you. With that, I welcome the mayor and start the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I want to first of all just thank everyone for coming out today to hear this discussion, this conversation. This is my first time as mayor ever doing this. I'm usually on the other side being asked questions, so it's kind of strange to be here. So I want to thank both of you for being here today. I also want to thank anyone that's here today in recovery or a family member or somebody that's sick and suffering out there to understand that we certainly do care about you. And the conversation tonight hopefully will help you a little bit. Can everyone hear me okay? As you know, this was Recovery Month here in the city of Boston, and we hosted a citywide green featuring folks focused on addiction and recovery here in the city. It was a great way to engage our city, people of all ages, backgrounds, on these important topics. It's great to be here with two of the authors, Maureen Cavanagh and Sam Quinones. It's my pleasure to moderate this conversation tonight, and I had a chance to meet Sam at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and I got a copy of Dreamland, and I just got so into it and so caught up in it. And Maureen, your book, If You Love Me, I haven't had a chance to read it myself, but I know that the struggles that my family has gone through, the same thing you went through, and it's a day at a time, and the struggles are still there. So I want to thank both of you for sharing in your thoughts and your words. So thank you for that. It's clear you've both written books on the opioid crisis. Maureen, your books about personal experiences, and I know that there are people in this church that have gone through personal experiences. Sam, your book is about the roots of the epidemic and the national impact it has, and I thought it was amazing. Many Americans didn't think about this problem as a national epidemic, or don't think about it as a national epidemic until it hits them personally. You were talking a little bit about the stigma and about the effects of it, but I guess my question to both of you is, how have people's personal experiences, either your own or someone else that you've spoken to, help you understand the national impact of the opioid epidemic?
Well, through the organization we have support groups all across the United States, about 17,000 people in these close support groups and that offer help to each other. So I hear a lot of stories. And the thing that's so striking is that all the stories are so very similar. People feel isolated, they feel alone in this horrible, they're all connected by the fact that the stories are so very similar. I don't think that when I first found out that my daughter was using heroin, when I first reached out for help, I felt like I was all alone. And I knew logically that there were other people out there who were this, but not in many years, so I really understand how similar I was to so many people across the country.
So what about your experience?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thanks again. And I want to actually say that you all just absolutely have to read Maureen's book here. It's a magnificent book. It's very raw, but how could it be otherwise, you know? I'm barreling through it, and it touches on all the issues that are so important. The late night phone calls, if my daughter's wearing sleeves, that's bad. If it's good, if she doesn't have sleeves, then that's good. All of that. I would say that my own evolution on this is I have no connection personally to addiction. I started this book because I'm a crime reporter, and I wanted to write about Mexican heroin traffickers. And so I didn't really know much about addiction, and in fact, in my book proposal, I didn't have anything about parents or anything on that topic, because I was really focused on drug trafficking cartels and that kind of stuff. And it was as I went along, I began to meet a few parents who didn't want to talk. And I sat down with them, and I began to realize the torment, the just utter torment that people were going through. And that was a startling revelation to me. I really did not consider it, that it was a part of the story. And so in journalism, the beauty of journalism is you let the facts lead you. You don't need the facts. And so I think this kind of led, like the ocean current, I let myself be taken by those experiences. And again, I was running into people, running into cops who were telling me how bad it was, and jailers and coroners, and I couldn't find very, very few parents who wanted to talk about it because everyone was so ashamed, mortified, thought they were staining the memory of their children or their father or their siblings or whatever. But I began to try to piece together what it meant to have an addict in the family and what that meant when really awareness of this problem was very scant. And that you were then all alone, and you thought you were all alone because nobody was talking about it. And you were not talking about it either. And so you thought you were all alone, when really if you'd known the population or whatever, you thought you only wanted 10-mile radius, and really it's just right around the corner, across the street, down the block, and the church you go to. It was that kind of revelation that we were all affected by it, that the first parents I talked to began to impart to me. And that gave me this idea, my God, this is huge. It's like this little tip here, this is this enormous iceberg, ominous thing out there. And the first parents I found were the first people I actually encountered. They would do this. They would go, when time came, when I cleared up what I was writing about to them, and they would look around like this, and like there's some kind of war resistance in France, and nothing. They touch me on the elbow, and they go home. And they come to their voice, my cousin, this kind of, that kind of thing. And I began to realize that this was not just an interesting sideline, it was a big part of the story, which I had never considered, because it was really far away from what I initially set out to do. But it was through talking with parents and then a few addicts as well that they brought me to this idea of the torment and how it was enhanced and magnified by silence.
That leads me to my second question, my second part of the stigma. And Maureen, in If You Love Me, you described the loneliness you experienced after your daughter had been publicly arrested, and only 2 people that knew expressed any concern. I guess I have a kind of a 2-part question for you. How do you think this stigma affected your family struggle? And how can we break down that stigma? Because I think that stigma is still there today.
I think that part of it, and that's the piece of it, because I was a person who, I started to go to allergic health meetings after my daughter was arrested, after it was in the paper, and after there was no point in being quiet anymore. I started to go to allergic health meeting, and then I would be the person that sat at the door waiting to bolt because I didn't know how long I could stay in the meeting. And the first time I've ever spoken in an allergic health meeting, which if anybody doesn't know what allergic health is, it's an unbelievable organization that we have here in Massachusetts that's made up of parents supporting each other, in-person meetings, and you can talk, they're all over the state. But when I first spoke at an allergic health meeting was when I was speaking about the book. So I tried, in the beginning you think, if I'm quiet about this, eventually it's just going to be a blip in her past, and I'd rather not have this problem. So we were quiet, and in being quiet, I didn't seek out help for myself. So we tried to get her into treatment, and that's absolutely that stigma of worrying about how in a small town we don't want her to be known as the girl with the heroin problem, not knowing that there were so many other people with the same problem, and of course all being very quiet about this. So I tried to keep it quiet. And then when she was arrested, and it was a big headline in the local paper, moral headliner student arrested, and there was no point in keeping quiet anymore. And I thought, well, you know what? If they were going to out me, I was going to out them. So I decided to start going to every event I could possibly go to with my Marblehead t-shirt on, and I realized that the more I spoke up, I watched people come to me, even from my town, and say, you know, the same thing's going on. And then people at events come up and say, thank you for speaking up, thank you for, and I realized that that's how we're going to stop this. And how we're going to change the stigma is by putting a real face on it. Putting a face of a parent who loves their child more than anything and did everything right, as much as anybody can do everything right. You know, you read all the doctor's thought books and you know, take them to all their practices and the pediatrician's appointments and you love them to pieces and they know that, and this still happens. And we quietly are ashamed as parents and think, what did I do wrong? But I don't feel that way. I don't, and my daughter said all along it wasn't that. It was, you know, not my fault. We don't create this. We can't cure it. We can't fix it for them. But we can talk about it. And when we start talking about it and we start putting a face on it, because we're just, of all the players in this, of the people that have passed away, the people we've lost, the people that are struggling, it's the parents that love our children so much. We can be the strong ones and get out there in front of this and fight for changes in how our children are helped or not helped, and changes in laws in order to help them too.
I think if there are any parents here tonight or people that are concerned about how to talk about this, please grasp them. You're not, as has been said so far in the beginning of this conversation, you're certainly not this alone. There's so many people in this church and in our city and in our state that have gone through this with their loved ones. Don't hold it in. Talk to someone. It's really important to do that. So I just want to pass that along. Sam, a major part of your book, Dreamland, focused on deceptive marketing techniques by Purdue Farmers, the maker of Oxycontin. On September 13th this year, the city of Boston announced that we will be suing opioid manufacturers and distributors, including Purdue, to recover past and future damages associated with this crisis. How do you think, and when I said that the other day, obviously there's a dollar amount for the manufacturer, but for me, it's not just about the dollar amount. Really, it's not really about the lawsuit. It's about kind of calling people out. How do you think companies like Purdue should be held accountable?
Well, I think companies don't really anything for money, bottom line, unless you want to get a few, I'm not even sure a few executives in prison have the same effect as a lot of money. What I think is interesting about a couple of things about these lawsuits is they are a barometer of how this has changed. But when I was writing Dreamland, there were 3 lawsuits that I know, and 2 were from my little. Well, 2 of them have been settled. One was, was not going well. And now, from 3 years later, you've got 300 plus counties. I don't know, numerous native tribes, a lot of cities. LA is also where I'm from. Small towns. I think almost every, if not every, Attorney General in all 50 states is suing them. And for a couple of reasons. One, I think this has become clear that this is a monumental thing. Okay? So we can no longer just say, well, it's a few places. No, it's all over the place. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that is true about this issue is that this is a classic example of private profits and socializing costs. All the profits going to companies that get involved in the drug industry, pharmaceutical makers, distributors, what have you. And all the costs, as you know, as mayor, as any executive can tell you, borne by police, jails, courts, coroners, foster care, foster children agencies, all that. And so this is now a major battlefield in the way where we can rank, but also I think it's a place where we can kind of rank price bills. Price of bills, these bills do not reflect we now recognize this as a major issue, and every politician cannot be seen as not doing anything about it, and we have AGs, all the attorney generals all across the country doing this thing. But also, we want to recognize that this is the opposite of capitalism. You know, capitalism isn't you win or you win. You profit at their costs, and we need to man up. And I think that is the way we find our way. That is the way that Purdue and other companies and distributors as well can be held accountable. I believe in the corporate world, no one understands anything but cash. So we'll see. The problem with the lawsuits is that they could go on for quite a long time. The problem is also that people compare the tobacco industry. Well, the problem is that opiates do have a role in modern medicine. They do not want to ban these products. They are very effective in certain limited areas and ways. They do have a role. That role is just not in every medicine cabinet in America. We're headed with it. So I believe these lawsuits are going to be very interesting. We'll see how they all. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure how it's all going to pan out. But to me, it feels like a reflection of the realization that we've come to all across this country that this has been a problem with private profits and socialized profits.
Thank you for that. This is a question for both of you. What do you think is a misconception about the opioid epidemic that you want people to better understand? Misconception about the epidemic.
I think that, personally, I'd like to see some jail time. I'd be okay with that too. I agree. In addition to that, I want to thank you very much for leading the lawsuits that I've read. I think these people belong in jail. I think that what they've done is essentially kill people, and if you did that any other way, they would be released from the charges. And I think that we need to see some of that for the doctors that overprescribe in such a disgusting way, and for the pharmaceutical companies that are still benefiting out of this. I think that the misconception is that it can happen to me, and I think that when people start to realize that it can happen to anybody, we might see more action, and that would be a very good thing. To say 72,000 people, Foxborough Stadium full of people every year as those seats all filled with people, and then all of the families that they affect, that their passing affects, and people still, and I don't think they do it because many other reasons other than fear, because we want to think that it can't happen to us, because if we think it can happen to us, oh my God, what are we going to do then? But we have to believe and understand that this does not discriminate.
Well, I think there are probably many misconceptions. I guess one I'll point out too, though, is that while it's true, pharmaceutical companies have a huge debt to pay, and doctors, some willingly, some very reluctantly, began to prescribe these pills as they did, creating this enormous supply that is all over the country and starts this whole thing. I would also say that I think this epidemic is calling on us to understand that our role as Americans in this. And we demanded miracles from doctors. Doctors, I talked to many, and they began this. One doctor said, I knew that we were in trouble when people began to come to me and demand antibiotics for symptoms of common cold. People demanding enormous amounts of opiates for wisdom tooth extraction, spraining ankles, this feeling like that we have no accountability for our own wellness. Americans, as a culture, obviously, wide exceptions throughout that. But I would say that this epidemic is calling on us to examine how we live, to question ideas we thought were settled, but also how we live. In my own case, I stopped drinking. I believe our own consumer habits have a huge amount to do with what went on in this country with regard to pain management I stopped drinking sodas. I eat much more, far more vegetables and fruit than I ever did. I mean, I think it's calling on us to understand our own participation in this. I long ago stopped believing in the bogeyman theory of history, which is that you can always see the villain and you know what his motives are and did that and all that. It's very, very much more complicated than that, I think. And I think it would be a loss if we as Americans did not step back and examine how much do we really need 24-hour capabilities? To me, 24-hour capabilities is just like heroin. Right? The same way that heroin addicts all go on together and talk about dope and that, people buy dope and all that, they don't want to do with anything that they dealt with friends and activities that they did before. That's what 24-hour news has done to us. It's changed us into these little bubbles where we talk to people who think like us, look like us, talk like us. And I think there's so much in this epidemic if you want to look at it that way, which is how I came to view it. It's a massive thing. That how we actually have been living and things that we had to question in our own lives, consumer decisions that we had to question, wellness decisions that we should be questioning in our own lives. And so I think that the idea that that we have a misconception that we had no role in this or a minor role in this, I think it's an important one to correct.
As a reporter, and you mentioned being a criminal reporter, what do you say that the people who suggest that building a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border will interfere with full legal rights against this man?
Well, a few things. First of all, I think I lived there too. I lived on the Department of Quinones. I came on a lot through reporting. Been there, I think, 6 times in the last 12 months or so. First of all, it's important to understand there are 2 walls. Yeah, there are a lot of walls along the border. We have a ton of walls. Now, if you want to get 2 walls, one starts 50 yards into the ocean, runs for 14 miles till it's a mountain. 100 yards into the United States, there's another wall that is far more imposing, along with sensors and cameras and probably the most bored border patrol agents in the entire agency, because nothing happens. But all of our drugs are coming through walls. Okay? Through Morales, through Juarez El Paso, through Matamoros, wherever. There are walls in all those places, and all of this heroin, fentanyl, whatever, not now, there is a huge quantities of them, are coming through walls. Heroin and fentanyl, in my opinion, are changing all of that because they are the easiest drugs to smuggle. Heroin, even before fentanyl, heroin was very easy to smuggle, and therefore it ignited kind of interest of a lot of very small independent entrepreneurs. Yeah, certain groups smuggle 20 or 50 kilos at a time, but a lot of people are doing it 1 kilo, 2, 3, things that are very put in a backpack, that kind of thing. They're crossing areas with alcohols, fentanyl, and so it questions whether we can actually do anything about that flow without, again, developing a community response. The wall is like the pills, right? What are you going to do about this horrible problem, a very complicated problem? One thing, we're going to build a wall. What are you going to do about this horrible problem like human pain? How do we deal with it? One thing, pills for everybody. Really what we need is a community response, and that means developing a community relationship with our southern neighbor Mexico. And of course, that relationship when I was the president of Mexico with Donald Trump, up to now it seems to me that we've been intent on just alienating and stomping our feet, because that's a narcotic too. It feels good when you just say, and we're just going to build a damn wall. Well, we already got walls, and you want to build I don't even know what they have in mind, but 2,000 miles of a third wall seems like the wrong thing. What we need is a partner in Mexico. It's been very difficult for Mexico. Mexico's not been a good partner. I've lived there 10 years. I have no rose-colored glasses when it comes to Mexico. We've been a very poor partner as well. All those guns that people are using to kill each other down there come from here. So we need to find ways of developing alliances. My feeling is no president in my lifetime has done what I would like to see, which is monthly meetings with Mexico. Come on, look at all the issues we have in that country. We should be intimately familiar with who their Undersecretary of the Environment is. That kind of knowledge we don't have, except for people in the State Department in this country. And we need to be developing those alliances. And it's through those alliances, again, through a community response to this, that I think we have effectiveness. And we beat back things like heroin or fentanyl, which now comes, through the mail.
Thank you. Maureen, I'm staying on the topic of walk, what are some of the ways that your daughter struggle with addiction, strengthening their relationship?
Everybody says to their children, I will love you no matter what. But few people get tested. I think the way we got tested. And I think that you get to dig down when something really this horrific happens and really understand how deeply a parent loves a child. And I see it not just myself. I see it with all of the parents that I deal with that will do anything for our children. And they get to see it too. That's always my one, people ask me, what should I do? What should I do? And whatever anybody decides to do, I always tell them, the most important thing that you can do is tell your child that you love them every day. Whether they answer your message, whatever way you can possibly get that to them. But that's probably the most important thing I did with her. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't tell her I loved her. And so I knew that things could always go tragically wrong. And she overdosed 13 times that I know of. So they did go tragically wrong many times. And but I would know that she knew no matter what that I loved her. So it did definitely, we were very close before, but very close.
Sam, in Dreamland, you write the antidote to heroin in this community. What do you think has led to the lack of community?
That's, I did not know, I didn't have that idea when I started my book. Yeah, that came as I got into this and I began to let the facts and interviews and experiences and observations and take them to different ways. And that was a big part of what came out of it. That this is addiction is a disease of isolation, and that has fit very well into our society today. Isolation, I think a lot of things. I think technology seems to isolate us at the same time as it connects us in kind of superficial ways. It seems to also isolate us. I would say that there has been, in some parts of the country, economic destruction and devastation. Globalization has wreaked kind of a havoc in a lot of areas, and like in Portsmouth, Ohio, and destroyed a lot of what held people together. People were not wealthy in Portsmouth; they were working class, but they felt a lot because everybody was in the same boat, and they had fairly inexpensive things to do. They put outside. So there's that. But in our suburbs too, this is the thing that struck me as I got into it. I thought this was all about Appalachian Rust. Really a big deal, bigger deal, in some of our wealthiest communities, nice off suburbs that people have done best. People have done best in the last 20, 30 years. It's their kids getting addicted and from drugs used to numb pain. You look at their lives, you go, what pain? But in our suburbs, we've built into our suburbs this kind of isolation, where everyone kind of is alone. You drive through the streets and nobody's outside. You go, is anybody home? I think again, as I said, certain media innovations like 24-hour cable news and social media could, when the internet started, I had this great, beautiful idea that we were about to enter into a wonderful renaissance of intellectual thought. We had access to all kinds of things we never had access to before, and now we find 15, 20 years into it that really it serves to just turn us against one another and atomize us even more. There's so much that's happened in this. One final thing is that we began to exalt, began to say, you know, the free market's wonderful. We beat the communists, so the free market is like, we'd be crazy to ignore its undoubted benefits. Meanwhile, we laugh at government. We you know, in it bumbling and dull and kind of in the way. And when government really is what grows from us in our system, it grows from us, and it's where we come together as a community to solve our communal problems, and yet we've turned our back on it and said it's not worth funding and it's somehow a tyranny to pay taxes, that kind of thing. So all of these things, I think, and more, we could go on quite a long time.
Maureen, let me ask you this. There's mothers and family members and loved ones of people struggling with addiction tonight in Boston, all over the country, all over the world, quite honestly. What advice do you give to somebody who cares deeply about their loved one that's in the grips of this addiction?
I think education. You have to educate yourself. That's probably the first thing.
Can you explain that to somebody who might be listening? Like, what does that mean?
I think you need to find out everything you can about the disease, and you know, the most up-to-date things that we know, because still people will argue with you that it's not a disease. It's like, well, the Surgeon General says it's a disease, and people have been saying it's a disease. They have found that it's a disease for a long time. So people need to understand the disease model of addiction. There's plenty of places to look for that, for information on that. I also think that they have to connect to each other. So you educate yourself, you find out, if possible, what other information is out there. But you may only be able to do that by connecting to resources, to groups, to places like the Office of Recovery Services, which is amazing here in Boston, the Learn to Cope, Magnolia across the country, other parents connecting to each other and giving each other information because they've been there. So, and at some point, parents have to realize that we want to fix things for our children, but you can't. And you can put information in their path, or any loved one. You can't fix this for somebody. You have to understand that this is theirs to fix, and that you have to take care of yourself, which is something that took me a long time to realize myself. So that's not the easiest thing, because as parents, we, you know, and loved ones, any loved one, we want to make it better. And you can't always make this better, but you have to take care of yourself.
In the last presidential election, Hillary Clinton, I think, might have been the first person to talk about the crisis, followed by Chris Christie and Jeb Bush. Donald Trump talked about it. So it's out on the forefront a little more now with elected officials. At least they're talking about it, because I think they realize what both of you said when they're talking to a crowd of people, that more heads are nodding when you bring up addiction. This question, I guess, is to both of you, or this idea. What advice would you give elected officials, whether it's a mayor, a town councilor, an alderman, a United States senator, a congressman, whoever, whatever. What advice would you give to an elected official on how to address this crisis?
Well, it kind of depends on what level of government they are, I think federal elected officials need to understand that the federal government has a huge role in funding new research, and I think that's beginning to happen through the NIH and all. That's very important. And also facilitating what's happening locally. I think a lot of places are figuring out how to deal with this. Again, in fits and starts. They're stumbling, of course, but I think a lot of folks are moving that direction. And I think the federal government, to some degree, the state government really needs to be encouraging. I've always thought it'd be great for a governor or president to go to some of these areas and just meet with a county group and say, hey, put your arm around them and go, way to go, man. You guys are starting this stuff on your own without any blueprint, without any pilot project, and go keep doing it, you know? That kind of thing is boosting morale. It's so hard out there because numbers keep going up and you don't seem to be making the progress that you like to be making, and yet you're valiantly battling on this thing. And so I think there's something to that. You know, I'd love to see if your politicians give some hugs. When my book came out, a month later, Hillary Clinton's campaign advisor for healthcare called me, and she was stunned. She said, Hillary's in Iowa and New Hampshire, and she's seeing all these people come out of nowhere. And I'm like, yeah, duh, I know. I mean, not duh, but you know, I know. Because this doesn't poll. You didn't know it was there, but because this stuff doesn't poll. Yeah, I get call up, what's the major issue facing you? Oh, jobs. Not that my daughter's addicted or the quarterback of the football team just died, you know? And so I told her, look, you need to do a hug tour. You need to have her, she didn't do it, but this was my like political consultancy, 5 minutes of political consultancy. It said, you need to go to 4 or 5 states, 3 or 4 counties in each state that are really hammered by this, and hug mothers. Hug them. They're not going to vote for you. Who cares? That doesn't matter. You got to be. This is a huge issue, and nobody sees it. I saw it, but nobody saw it because it doesn't poll well. So I believe there is still a huge role for that among politicians as an encouragement. Yeah, new laws, fine. Those things are necessary a lot of times. But gee, I think you miss a bit when you don't just go out and give people some hugs and tell them, damn it, way to go. You were ahead of the curve. You're doing this on your own. And I just want to be there and let you know that America's behind you, or I'm behind you, or the state legislature of this state is behind you. You know, that kind of thing just boosts morale because it's so hard and people are working so hard at it, and it's discouraging. And so literally when I'm on the road, I'm hugging people all the time now. Moms mostly, dads sometimes. And that's what I kind of what I do. I'm a hug guy, you know, just keep going, man. It's okay, you know. So.
What about you, Maureen? What do you think? What's your not message, but what would you encourage?
You know, part of what Magnolia does, the nonprofit that I run does, is try to fill the gaps. And one of the things that we do is give scholarships for sober living. And I think a big part of the problem here is we're treating this disease like an acute condition, instead of something that's going to take a long time to recover from. So we have people out, we have people that have been, you know, in the grips of this for years, and we want to put them into treatment. And God, Boston and Massachusetts in general does such an unbelievable job compared to so many other states. But we still are putting people in treatment for 28 days at best, and then out they go, and they don't have any place to live, and they don't have jobs, skills, or the ability to get a job. What have they been doing for the last 2 years? Or maybe they have a criminal record. We have to help people go back into life. And I think that's one of the most important things. We're also not training our first responders and our people in our hospitals enough to understand that not everybody, you know, but there's some that still need that coaching about this is a person, and they may have come into this emergency room like my daughter did, you know, 14 times, but that 14th time, you may say just the right thing and point them in the direction instead of giving them a list of numbers to call, and that may be the last time they ever walk through. And there's so many things, but there's also a large population that's been marginalized for years and that did not get the help 25 years ago when there was other, you know, drug crises. And we have to include them in the solutions and help get them on board, because the numbers are rising. Like, it's not just a white upper class, you know, or middle class effect anymore. That's not just who's being affected.
Thank you. I think at this point we're gonna take some questions from the audience. I just ask you, or comments, if you could get to your question. So the quicker the question, the more answers we can get.
Questions? People can just line up here.
If you could just identify name, first name, where you're from.
Absolutely. Mayor Walsh, Sam, Maureen. Good evening. My name is Michael Maloney. I'm actually a candidate for Suffolk County DA right now. I realize the value of treatment over incarceration. Can you hear me, sir?
Close. I can't really hear you. I'm sorry. It's so echoey.
I am involved in the judicial system. I have been for a long time. I'm currently running for Suffolk County District Attorney. I realize the value of treatment over incarceration. It's something I've been advocating for a very long time. When we're dealing with the judicial system, and I mean this to all three of you, when we're dealing with the judicial system, I would appreciate your thoughts in regards to treatment options afforded specifically in Massachusetts, and perhaps what can be done. It's not just about affording the treatment, like you said, about the 28 days, Maureen. Oftentimes, treatment is simply not even subpar, but just lacking entirely after that 28 days. I would welcome your thoughts in regards to creative alternatives on the backside. Thank you.
Let me just jump at this first. I've been in this business, doing this stuff for 21 years. I filed legislation at the State House rather than incarceration treatment instead of incarceration, depending on the crime. And I think America's learned over the years that prison isn't the right answer for a lot of folks.
Yes, sir.
And I think that we have to have treatment on demand, and we have to work with our insurance companies and have a lot more opportunities. The 28 days, Maureen said, isn't working. And we have to have more continuum of care that actually works for everyone. And I think that there's a place in society for district attorneys and judges and police, but in particular district attorneys and judges, to come together when somebody gets arrested, understanding, identifying that this person committed a crime, but there's an underlying cause for that. And I don't think we do a good enough job of that here in America, and certainly in Massachusetts. I think we probably do better in Massachusetts than we do in most places, and better in Boston than we do in most places in the country. But I definitely think that there has to be, that's a question, I guess, when I asked earlier about elected officials, to truly understand, not just say it on a microphone, and not just say it in a debate, but actually understand it and believe it and care about it. That's my take on it.
I have a board member right now whose daughter is in Framingham for a probation violation for something that she did 3 years ago, and she's been struggling with drugs and with mental health issues. So they had to put her on a mental health watch. Her mother couldn't come and see her. And this is for a probation violation. She hasn't reoffended. She just can't seem to get this right because she has serious mental health issues and serious substance use issues. So I think that I read somewhere that I think it's 80% of the people in prison have either a substance use disorder, a mental health issue, or both. We have got to address this and look at those things first, because if we do that, we'll reduce the recidivism. We won't have people cycling in and out, and also the death rate of people that are just getting out of prison, another thing, or jail, and then without the drugs in their system, and then going back and using and dying. So.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. As the next person approaches, I think we also have an opportunity with our prisons, while we have a captive audience, actually to lay down some real good programming in there.
Absolutely.
And sometimes prison is the only option that a family
I actually
has.
think one of the most exciting things that's happening in this country right now with regard to this epidemic is how jail is being transformed. Jail has traditionally been a place that's either predatory or tedious, or really both, where people kind of vegetate. It's actually the place where, a typical addict on the street, kind of obeying the dope for months and months, and then gets to jail, detoxes. It's at the at that moment that the addict understands the destruction, that he's wreaked on his life, and it's at that moment when we put him into a situation that's predatory or boring or both, nothing going on, sitting around arguing about history or Discovery Channel, that kind of nonsense, right? Well, if you go to certain states, and I don't know about Massachusetts, I'm sorry, but I know Kentucky is way ahead on this. Kentucky has 25 jails in which they have transformed pods into full-time recovery services, the same kind you would get on the outside at a treatment center on the outside if you could afford it and if there were a bed, none of which is true. This is where, on the street, the problem is when an addict says, gee, this is awful, I got to change, I'm going to check myself in, and gets there and he finds it's a 3-month waiting list. Here it's treatment on demand, basically, in these jails. I was in Louisville jail. I suggest you check it out if you're in the Louisville area. addicts really, or addicted inmates really working with each other. So those who've been at it for a long time, I interviewed a woman. Before the interview, she had just come from cleaning the vomit off of a woman who had just arrived detoxing. They are nurturing places. I don't know how many, I never thought I'd ever use the word nurture and American jail in the same sentence, but that's what's happening. And again, it's happening, these are very conservative areas. These are jailers who are not, but they see things are not working, and so they begin to say, maybe we need to change. And also what they then do, normally jail severs a relationship once the person leaves jail. But these jails have recovery services afterwards. So Vivitrol, sober living, employment services, all of which turning jail into a place of productivity, nurturing. It is not a panacea. People do relapse, but it's certainly a better way of doing jail than the vegetative state that most jails, the best you can say is that it's a vegetative state, you know. So I would suggest you look at what's happening in Kentucky, and that's to me, that's if we turn jail into an asset when it was a liability, I think we have moved forward as a society, just a huge stride ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you. My brother overdosed on fentanyl about a month ago. And I will say, Mayor Walsh, that the only reason he's alive is that the first responders had Narcan. So thank you for that. But this is a question for you, Maureen, and if it's too close, personal, let me know. So it's my brother, and I see my mother suffering and going through the same thing you probably did, is what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? But I see mostly in her now is anger. And I don't know how to ask this, but it's different for everybody. How do you get past that? You said you told your daughter, I love you every day. And I see my mother unable to get there.
Yeah. I think probably she's just protecting herself with that anger. And I see people do that because it's so much easier to be angry than terrified, you know, and that's probably where that's coming from. I don't, you know, everybody handles this differently. Right. And I mean, I would imagine that that's probably what that is. It's probably if she really told you the truth, she's probably absolutely terrified of losing him, you know, and that's...
Right, it is, because it would never happen to me family.
Right, well, everybody is.
It's true,
yeah. It really,
I know that sounds so snobby, it would never happen to me.
You know what, you should encourage her to reach out to other people that are going through this. And there's plenty of places, and I'd be more than happy to tell you where, but to have her reach out to other people, because that's the stage, and everybody's angry too. People get angry. You wind up having all your jewelry stolen, and your whole idea of what your child's life, your personal views of what your child's life was going to be, and this affects everybody in the family, everybody. So there's some anger there, but she may be just using that to protect herself.
All right, thank you. And thank you for your courage to speak out too. Thank you.
If you want, we can line up here too as you come in. Feel free.
My name's Shauna Crawford. I am a recovery coach at Gandara Center in Brockton, Massachusetts. I'm also was part of the opiate epidemic. I'll have 2 years in February clean. Do you find that the peer-to-peer model works better? And do you think we should bring that in more to detox in halfway houses?
Absolutely. I mean, as FMA, I think that this is like, we need more, and I know that you're working hard on doing this, more recovery coaches, more peer-to-peer, because that's somebody who's been there. I mean, it's the same thing with the parents. That's kind of what we're doing. But when someone is struggling or someone's, working really hard on trying to want to get well, when they can listen to somebody else who's been through it, and even though it was hard, they got to the other side of it. That's like, there's no one, I don't think, there's not anyone that can relate as well as someone who's done it.
Okay,
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Morgan Rocha. I'm a journalism student at Emerson College. But that aside, I am a child of a parent that struggled with addiction. 3 years clean now, so thank God for that. But this is a question for Mayor Walsh. I so appreciate the Recovery Month, especially since my situation and so many people in my life that have been touched by addiction. But what are we going to do beyond Recovery Month? What are the plans for especially the city of Boston to continue this sense of community?
Thank you for that. You know, September is technically Recovery Month, but Recovery Month for me is every day. It really is a day at a time. We have laid down a lot of programming in the city with the Office of Recovery Services, with our programs in different parts of the city. We turned our 311 line into a recovery hotline. A lot of people don't know the front door, how to get into recovery. They're a parent that their son or daughter is struggling and they have no place to turn, and they're sheltering and they've never experienced it before, or they haven't talked about it. So we're constantly working at this every single day. And I think it's something that, for me personally, it's a day at a time program. I mean, I'm in recovery. I live it every day, and understanding the addiction and the disease portion of this, and the stigma portion of this, you just have to constantly do it. And I think that what we do is we do it in the city, but we also share it across the United States of America. We talk to other mayors about it and let them know. When I first got elected mayor, the mayors didn't have anything set up to talk about the epidemic. And what we did was we started the Mayor's Recovery Task Force. And we brought some of the ideas of what we did here in Boston, and we brought it to them and explained them. We put together a toolkit. Sam talks about a toolkit. Cities and towns did it without a toolkit. But we did a toolkit. We expressed it to them. So it's a constant reminder. We also engage our hospitals, Mass General Hospital, and the Kraft Foundation put vans on the street, and they're working on the private way. Our health centers are engaged. Our police and fire do follow-up when somebody is administered Narcan in the home. A few days later, our fire department goes back and visits that house because at that particular moment, that person's not willing to go into treatment. They black out and they don't know what's happened. So we're constantly working at this every single day. And I think my advice is to talk about it. This was not created by elected officials in government per se, directly, and it's not going to be solved that way either. There's no magic piece of legislation, or there's no magic elected official that's going to solve it. This is something that's going to be solved at the kitchen table. This is going to be solved in people's homes. This is going to be solved by having conversations, being supports. That young woman that came up before you, her mother's upset and angry. You know, my advice is pray and try and get her to a Learn to Cope meeting or an Al-Anon meeting, or talking to somebody that's gone through it before so they can explain it. Because our first natural instinct is to ignore it and pray it goes away. This is like cancer. If you ignore cancer and pray it goes away, you're going to die. And if you have somebody in your family that's struggling, or you're struggling and you ignore it, you're going to die. So it really is a disease, and it really is about getting out there. So that's kind of in a nutshell. You know, we celebrate or recognize September as Recovery Month, but in our Office of Recovery Services, it happens every single day. In our shelters and in our programs and our detoxes, and John McGann from the Gavin House here is here. You know, he does it every single day. So that's what we're doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So my name is Dominic Esposito. Thank you all for what you're doing with the opioid epidemic, and the books, and Maureen and Mayor Walsh. It's just incredible. But my question really centers around accountability, and Mayor Walsh, you talked a little bit about this, but you know, how can we truly hold companies, especially pharmaceutical companies like Purdue Pharma, accountable, given that the scale of the profits are just so large, right? You're talking about a company that's benefited to the tune of close to $35 billion. The Sackler family alone is worth $14 billion. They paid a lawsuit in 2007. Why should we think that it's going to be any better with more lawsuits, and they're not going to just continue the same rhetoric? And you know, if you talk to 80% of, maybe this is, 80% of heroin addicts will admit to having started on some sort of synthetic opioid, right? So they were really, as Sam pointed out, the culprits behind this. And so the question is really, how do we hold them seriously accountable so that this doesn't happen in the future with future epidemics?
Let me start that, and I'm going to turn it over to these guys. I think Purdue Pharma was in my office at the State House when I was probably 2002. And I basically accused them of murdering people. As a state rep, I said, you're murdering people because people are taking heroin. And they took offense to that, and they left my office. And it wasn't until I read Dreamland where the whole story came about for me. And I'm thinking I'm educated in this area. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a licensed social worker. I'm not a licensed counselor. I don't have any of those credentials. But I think I know what's going on. So I read Dreamland. And you realize the whole picture's painted there for you. And not just for me, but for all of America to read. And a lot of America's read it. That's one way of holding them accountable. The second, in Maureen's book, and as I said, other people have written books like Maureen that have talked about the journey of their family and the addiction to that family. That's another way of holding these places accountable and having dialogues like this. So the lawsuit, to me, isn't about the $65 million that we're trying to bring back. It's not about that. But it's about holding them accountable. And as Sam mentioned earlier, these drugs are needed in a box. They're needed for a box. How do we make them accountable to put them back in the box that they deal with what they're supposed to deal with? And that's one of the things I think we have to do is continually talk about it, continually push forward, continually fight against it, continually educate people, continually reminding people what the history is, continually talking about it, making it very uncomfortable for these companies because they are driven by money and they are driven by profit, and they could care less that the three of us are on the stage tonight having a conversation about it. But I think if we continue having dialogue about it and continue those dialogues, I think that helps. I don't know if that, I'll turn over.
Yeah, I don't know if lawsuits per se. Look, this epidemic, I think, has no solution. It has many, many solutions, plural, all of them small, and that might be one small part of it. I do believe that that should pain pills take their rightful place, part of pain pills taking their rightful place in our culture, as necessary as they are, they have a certain place in it, and the way that happens is when companies understand in ways that are important to them, not important to us, but important to them, that this is how the society views them, and usually that's a fine, that's money that they have to pay that they can't give to their stockholders and so on. I would also think that through this, we come to a deeper understanding. These companies have created magnificent improvements in human life. There's no doubt about it, But we always have to keep in mind that companies sell pills. They don't sell wellness. We individually have control over our own wellness. So the lawsuits, I think, are one part of it, but there are many other areas in which we can understand what happened here and understand that what our role is, what their role is, So I try to get away from the idea that there's one thing that's going to solve this and just say many things, and this is a lawsuit. Lawsuits appear to be part of that.
I think that $65 million sounds like a lot of money, but to these companies, it's not that much money, and it would be, but I think what you're doing is drawing attention back on it and putting the eye back on it, and people are watching again because of what you've done and what other people are doing, and also what Dominic did. So I don't know if you realize, he's the person that dropped the opioid spoon, that large sculpture in front of Purdue Pharma. And that helped bring the attention back where it needed to be and just gave the message that we're watching you. And these protests that have sprung up after that and after the lawsuit. And I think they'll continue now because we're watching them again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was you who did that? You did that bent spoon thing? Oh, wow. Very powerful, man.
My name's Tom. I'm a member of the recovery community. I think we're all under the agreement that we're in the midst of a crisis here, but what can we further do to diffuse the negative stigma associated with addiction? It seems that everybody comes to the agreement that we need to address the issues. We need more beds, we need more detoxes. And then when it comes to the point where somebody realizes the detox might be built in close proximity to where they live, the story changes, people resist it. What can we further do? And you have experience with this, Maureen, because your daughter struggled with addiction and you experienced it firsthand. What can we do to diffuse that stigma that's associated with addiction and get people more engaged?
We need to talk about it. We need to put a face on it. I educated myself enough to know that I have 4 children and one of them has this disease. The trigger may have been her using drugs for the first time, or it could have been alcohol or whatever it was. But she has a disease, and it's got to be treated like a disease. And I absolutely refuse to let anybody shame me or stigmatize her, because this is a medical condition, and it's going to be treated as such. And when people start standing up and refusing to allow people to say the derogatory things, to not be educated, and to educate them when they don't understand, because some people just don't understand. But I think I got to that point where I did understand this, and I refused to allow that. And I think that when more people start doing that, that's when the stigma will start going away. I mean, even with our campaign, right? We have the No Stigma campaign, and we started to put faces on the people that are suffering from this disease. We need to start putting faces on the families too. They have to be not afraid to stand up and say, yes, this is happening in my family, and I don't know what to do about it, and I need help, and I need my child or my family member to get help. And I think then we'll start seeing changes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for being here and sharing everything you have. I'm Cecilia. I live just down the street in the Fenway part of Boston. Unfortunately, in February of this year, a close cousin of mine passed away from an accidental overdose in East Boston. And while we've talked a lot about recovery and addiction while loved ones are going through it, what might you be able to recommend for loved ones who, unfortunately, when the worst has happened? Right now, among our friends and our family, there's been a desire to really remember the light that he was in our lives and all the positive impact he had. But for me, there's still deep confusion about what he was going through. And while I don't want to constantly stir up the pain that we are experiencing, I do want to better understand what happened.
I think it's all about connecting to other people. You know, they say that addiction or substance use disorder is a disease of isolation. And that's what people do, is they isolate within the disease, where they don't reach out. When they start reaching out, that's why whether you're a 12-step person or any other kind of meeting, those meetings have such power because they bring together people that support one another. And the families need that just as much.
Yeah, there's organizations too that you can go to, because a lot of times parents will feel that, or family members, I should have done more, is it my fault, what happened, how did it go, you know. So there's organizations and people out there that actually support families when they lose loved ones.
Yeah,
so there is.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's GRASP, there's an organization, an online organization called Team Sharing, and they have meetings all over, a lot of meetings in Massachusetts, but so does GRASP. And these are specific meetings meant for, and there's an online presence too, where there's online support groups, where the people are, they've all lost a loved one, and they understand all the different ups and downs, and that this doesn't go away. You know, this is forever. You're going to feel some level of this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a few more minutes for questions, so if you just be...
2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Noam. I'm a Master's in Public Health student, and my question is, we see that Congress is sort of about to put together some sort of opioid response bill, but one thing that is missing is coverage and access for non-pharmaceutical treatment for a lot of the issues that people have. How do we fill in that gap? How do we apply more pressure to get that how do we ensure that we don't go through this cycle over again?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things we face, that we, and one way we got, one thing that began to happen is there's momentum for using narcotic painkillers for all pain and all human beings at all times in huge doses, was that we began to demand doctors cure us, right? But increasingly when that began to happen, insurance companies then stopped reimbursing for a wide variety of pain strategies that did not involve opioids. So acupuncture and Tai Chi and diet and physical therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. You know, they used to prescribe marital counseling. Pain, marriage is pain, right? So they prescribe, and they would get reimbursed for that. It's very cheap. You know, it's long-term. It also requires the buy-in of the patient. But increasingly as this went along, insurance companies cut back, and they, maybe not on all of it, but a little bit, and so pretty soon the doctor in that appointment room, very intimate setting, just the doctor really had only one tool, and that was the pain pill. And what we've done is we have, and I think it's very important to do, we have battled mightily to cut back on supply of these pills nationwide, and I think that's a very thing. But at the same time, we have not really given people who are up on very high doses, chronic pain patients, other options. And the doctor is all alone. The doctor is like, well, you're up on 800 milligrams. I don't think that's safe. I'm really scared about that. But you know, I don't have anything else because the insurance company will reimburse for this and that and the other thing. Where we have seen a lot of movement is in places like the VA. Go to a VA pain clinic now. They've done a 180 on this. They were a first adopter of opioid pain strategies. And I went to the one in Las Vegas, and in Las Vegas they have acupuncture, Tai Chi, they have all these things now, a wide array, treating every human being as an individual, saying, we're going to customize a strategy that involves a lot of these things for you. And I believe that is I was just speaking to a medical society in Kansas. That was one of my big messages. I was saying, I would suggest you as doctor association really think hard about arming your people with more strategies, and that involves lobbying insurance companies. I think the more people, a lot of different parts of our society have understood their role in this and have stepped up, and insurance companies have not. And the other thing they need to do, as I think was mentioned earlier, is provide a lot more coverage for medically assisted treatment for addiction. But just focusing on pain, which is how we got into this, I just think we need to get back to those days where, of course, we have a responsibility too, but I think insurance companies need to step up, and they have so far have not. How we get there, I'm going to leave that to political consultants, honestly, but I talk about it an awful lot whenever I can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lori Carpenter. I have a somewhat similar question. The role in a lot of the strategies for opioid treatment is MAT, which saves lives, is crucial. But what seems to be left out of it is the long-term, the community building, whether that's AA, smart recovery, whatever that is, along with the mental health services. Those are the things that seem to be sort of brushed under the rug, particularly by insurance, as you just mentioned. Do you have any thoughts on how we're going to get from the insurance companies and the doctors telling us how this needs to run, since, I hate to say this, but they are part of what got us into this problem, as to how the community is going to support everybody getting back out, whatever form that takes?
My office is panicking right now that you brought this up.
Sorry.
No, I agree with you. When there's a place in society for methadone, and there's a place in society for Suboxone, but it's supposed to come with a recovery component and a counseling component. And it's not happening.
When they say if you take your patient off of MAT, you should be brought up for medical malpractice, it freaks me out.
But there's no, in my opinion, and I'm not a doctor, but I've watched enough of it, there's no follow-up. And what I'm concerned about is we're becoming a society of just giving a Suboxone prescriptions, which gets pharmaceutical companies rich. Methadone. If you talk to a lot of folks, a lot of folks won't take the Vivitrol shot because they know that they want the Suboxone prescription because you can mess with that. And I get worried about, when I was a state rep, I fought the mandate on halfway houses that they took people in that were on assisted medicine. I fought it because there was an abstinence component to it. Not everyone's going to get clean using abstinence. But there has to be a system in place that if you're going to do medical treatment, if you need to be on that dosage, you can weed the person off that dosage. There are 70%, I would say probably 70% of the people that are on methadone and Suboxone, they do it the way it's supposed to happen, and they get some support. But that 30% is just constantly, they're just out there, and they're lost. And I do think that we have to do more regulation. The Mass Medical Society wrote a paper the other day. They did a paper on assisted treatment, and I asked them when they came to my office, did you bring in the halfway house community? Did you bring in? Well, no, but we talked to them. No, they need to be at the table, the same table, because the program can work if they do it correctly. And that's something I think that we're going to be battling with for the next bunch of years, because I think people are looking for, quite honestly, people are looking for the quick fix. Quick fix, let's give them Suboxone, let's give them methadone, and they'll get sober, and at least they won't be shooting up, but they won't be high, but they won't be, that's not the answer, in my opinion.
Thank you. I agree with you.
Well, let me just say, before whoever's coming up here, thank you both. Thank you. This is a great conversation. I want to thank everyone for coming out today and tonight. You know, these are conversations that we have to have more of and talk more about. But I appreciate the fact that both of you took the time, did the research, lived the experience of your books that have actually really given hope to people. Both of your books have given hope to so many. You have no idea. And your book it turns into a spirituality piece for people to read, because as they read the stories, there's also the positive side of it. In both books, there's a positive side. So I just want to thank you both for being with us today and here in Boston, and thank you for sharing both of your experiences. Even though the books are different, they're the same exact book. And thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you everybody again for attending. There's books for sale out front, and if you could line up out front, the authors are going to be there in just a few minutes to sign books if you'd like. So just make a line.